Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me. Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. With Europe and America increasingly locked in an acrimonious struggle over the future of Greenland, we examine the fate of the Western world. Could it end up divided and at odds with each other? Could NATO collapse? And if that happens, will Russia and China be the only countries to gain? And what sort of international order will we then have to grapple with? Those are the issues I shall raise today with the former editor-in-chief of The Economist and chairman of the International Institute for Strategic Studies, Bill Emmott. Mr. Emmott joins me live from Dublin in Ireland. Bill Emmott, President Trump has said he wants complete and total control over Greenland, and he's determined to get it one way or the other, as he puts it, the easy way or the hard way. And to that end, he's now announced 10% tariffs on 8 European countries, rising possibly to 25% in June. How do you view Trump's behavior?
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure and an honor to be on your show and to be with you, Karen. I'm delighted to play a small part in your great endeavor. As far as President Trump is concerned, he has simply the mentality of a man. He's a predator. He thinks in territorial terms, and he wants to expand his territory, and he uses bold, aggressive methods to seek to do so. So that's what he's doing over Greenland. It's been a long interest of his, or obsession of his, I think, essentially in his desire to create a legacy as the president who increased the land area of the United States by around 5%, a larger, or put another way, a very large addition equivalent to the addition of territory that Thomas Jefferson achieved in the 19th century with the Louisiana Purchase. That's how he thinks, and he's going to use as much muscle as he can to try to persuade Europe, or specifically Denmark, to give way. I think it's absolutely vital that Europe pushes back, and pushes back hard.
And in fact, the truth is that Europe is responding both uncompromisingly and toughly. Macron has said tariff threats are unacceptable, no intimidation or threat will influence. Starmer has called Trump's threat completely wrong. Meta Fredrickson has called it blackmail, and the Financial Times has reported that the European Union is considering retaliatory tariffs of over $1 billion, $100 billion, I should say. So do we have a US-Europe fight on our hands?
I think we do have a US-Europe fight on our hands. You know, when I was editing The Economist, I used to think that actually in some ways the most frequent cover story that I published in my 13 years in that role was a rift in the transatlantic alliance. We've had many rifts in the transatlantic alliance over the time that I can remember. That my time was in the 1990s and the 2000s. Now we have another one, but this is the most serious one I've ever seen, because I think that Donald Trump has increased the parameters of the possible. He has shown that he is willing to play hard, play dirty, and absolutely treat Europe as an opponent who he wishes to conquer. And the question for Europe is how united Europe can be in response to this. It's fine having bold words saying things are unacceptable, saying that we must prepare retaliatory tariffs, but the nature of the European Union is that we are 27 countries. Two of the other targets for Trump's tariffs, the UK and Norway, are not members of the European Union. The big question which we will see play out, and which will be tested, I think, by Trump in the coming week, is able to and willing to carry this through in a united way. And in particular, with a battle like this, it's not about the first step, the third step, the fourth step. I believe it's vital for Europe that we are willing to fight back, and that we are willing to show him that he can't just get away with it. Because if we do that, I think he will back down, actually. If he sees a united, forthright Europe willing to hurt the United States in various ways, he will back down. But he starts this battle assuming that he has the dominant position, that he, in his language, holds the cards, and that Europe is fundamentally weak because of our divisions, because we are 27 countries, outsiders like the UK. We're going to see tested over the coming weeks.
Let's for a moment, Bill Emmott, look at Trump's reasons for demanding Greenland. First of all, he claims it's essential for US national security, and he argues, I'm quoting him, world peace is at stake. China and Russia want Greenland, and there is not a thing Denmark can do about it. But the Chinese and the Russians have denied this, and the Nordic countries have told the Financial Times that Chinese and Russian ships have not been sighted in Greenland for a long time. So what do you make of this particular argument, that it's essential for US security?
Well, I'm sure that I should treat this as a family show and not use bad language. But nonetheless, I think to use more gentle language, which is much more gentle than I really think, I could call this balderdash. It's just nonsense, this claim. The fact is that Greenland is important for security. It was important throughout the Cold War for national security. And that's why in 1951, Denmark and the United States, fellow members of NATO, of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, signed an agreement which permits America to open any military bases on Greenland as it chooses, as it wishes. During the Cold War, it had a multitude of military bases there because of all of the tensions of the time and the passing submarines of the Soviet Union and the danger of nuclear missiles and so forth. Now, America itself has reduced its presence from one time 10,000 personnel to 150 base, which is a space observation base. So does this suggest America really treats this as a national security scare? I believe not. There is no evidence that, as you said, that Russia or China are actually actively seeking to threaten Greenland. The only country that's threatening Greenland is the United States of America.
Trump has also begun to question Denmark's ownership of Greenland. In a truth social that he's sent to the Norwegian Prime Minister, he asks, why do they have a right of ownership? And then he adds, it's only that a boat landed there 100 years ago, but we had boats landing there also. How do you respond to that?
This is very dangerous. The fact is, if we have to get into historical records, there isn't any doubt that on many occasions over the past century, the United States officially recognized Denmark's sovereign control of Greenland in a multitude of treaties, one from 1950 I recognized. So that contradicts his position. But the most important reason this is worrying is that this move, the arena of the argument, absolutely into the territory beloved of Vladimir Putin and of Xi Jinping. They love to claim, with regard to Ukraine, in the case of Vladimir Putin, in regard to Taiwan and other places, but particularly Taiwan in the case of Xi Jinping, that they have some sort of historic right to the country. Now, Ireland was controlled by, and at many periods part of, England and then Britain and then the United Kingdom for 800 years until 1921. So you could say the United Kingdom claimed historic right to Ireland on the same basis as Donald Trump is claiming that the United States has some sort of right to Greenland. But I wouldn't like to go out of my house and say that with a megaphone here, because I would be lynched, and rightly so. The fact is that historic claims of the type that Donald Trump, Vladimir Putin, and Xi Jinping are citing do not belong in the modern world, a modern world in which, under the Nations Charter, to respect sovereign integrity, to respect territory, to not change borders by force, and to resolve all disputes without the resort to military force. So this kind of argument that there's some sort of American historic claim to Greenland is very dangerous thing to do, but also to question the previously entirely accepted Danish claim to Greenland and ownership of Greenland is itself unacceptable. The Greenlandic people can contest this, just as the Scottish people sought to achieve independence from the United Kingdom in a referendum in 2015. That's perfectly legitimate to do it in a democratic method, but not the way Donald Trump is talking.
Donald Trump has come up with a third explanation for his demand for Greenland. He claims he's done more for NATO than any other person since the founding of NATO. And then he adds, NATO now should do something for the United States. Does NATO owe Greenland to America?
Certainly not. I mean, first of all, that kind of language is the sort of hyperbole that Donald Trump loves to use. You know, every action that is taken by his government is some way historic, is bigger than anything anyone has ever done before. And frankly, only a person with the mentality of a child would make such ridiculous claims. But secondly, only in the sense that America's military spending of getting close to $1 trillion, far larger than that of the other NATO countries, can it be said that the United States has done such a huge amount for NATO? And the fact is that America's military spending is so large, not because of NATO, but because it is a global power, because it has bases in South, because it has a global military footprint. He conveniently likes to claim that it is somehow plays a disproportionate role, and that, frankly, it just is not true. What America has done, particularly since the end of the Cold War, but also before, is that it has sought to control NATO for its own purposes. The reason there is now a division of labor within NATO, in which America particularly dominates command and control and intelligence and communications and heavy lift capacity, is because that is what America wanted. It's how America designed NATO in order to maintain its level of control actions of NATO. So what America has done is to try throughout its history, but particularly since the end of the Cold War, to keep NATO subservient to the United States. So it's pretty rich now to claim that this deliberate American policy of keeping NATO subservient means that somehow NATO owes enormous piece of territory to the United States in return. frankly, that is absolutely risible.
There is a fourth explanation made this time not by Trump, but by Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff, who tends to be rather close to Trump and often echoes Trump's views. Miller says, to control a territory, you have to be able to defend a territory, improve a territory, inhabit a territory. Denmark, he says, has failed at every single one of those tests. In other words, Denmark is incompetent at governing Greenland.
Well, I think that you can talk to the 56,000 residents of Greenland and ask them whether they think that the government in Copenhagen is competent or incompetent. And I'm sure they have complaints, probably about health and education and jobs and water supplies and all sorts of things. But they will not actually have any complaints about security. Ask those 56,000 Greenlanders, and they will have many reasons to resent the controlling Copenhagen, just as the Scottish people have plenty of reasons to resent the so-called incompetent people in Westminster, in my country, in the United Kingdom. But among those things is not security. There is absolutely no evidence that Greenland's national security or islandic security has been compromised in any way by the government of Denmark. A fact that is frankly evidenced by successive American administrations' choice to reduce the number of personnel they've had on Greenland, to reduce the number of bases from, I think it was 15 at its peak, now down to 1.
17.
Your research is better than mine. Absolutely, 17. So if that was the case, if there was a real threat, is now failing to, then why would America have done that? That is, frankly, again, Stephen Miller is acting as the Goebbels of this regime. It's pure propaganda, what he's saying, and it needs to be dealt with in that form.
Now, last week, Denmark sent additional troops to Greenland. Sweden, Norway, Finland, France, the United Kingdom, Netherlands, and Germany sent reconnaissance teams. France has also said that it plans to set up a consulate in Greenland. What are the chances that all of this can convince Trump that Greenland's security is assured and perhaps deter him from stepping in? Or is it just simply going to rile him?
Well, I think that the main purpose of sending these troops is to create a tripwire, to convince him and people like Stephen Miller and the Secretary of War, as he calls himself, Pete Hegseth, that he cannot simply send a few helicopters to Greenland and declare that they have control and then annex it in the way that Vladimir Putin did to Crimea in 2014. I think that's the model, Crimea in 2014, and the importance of the troops is to show that no, get over this tripwire if you're going to do that. We are standing in your way. We're obviously not going to be able to fight a major war with you, but the things that are at stake here are more serious than simply just being able to say we are going to annex this territory. It will rile Donald Trump, but so will trade retaliation, and I think it's very important that European Union and the non-European Union countries that you mentioned, who've also sent troops, are willing and prepared in a unified way to match him punch for punch and show that they are not there to be pushed around. And then he will negotiate.
In other words, you push back and he will give in.
Well, I think that he will act in the way that he has done with China and with Brazil, actually, who have pushed back hard, and then he has backed off and sought to de-escalate and sought to then hold further talks in the future. So he has reacted in what is, in a way, a more conventional way to say, let's sit down and discuss this. So that's why he's going to be in Beijing in April, at least on current plans, for a summit with Xi Jinping, because he backed down but used the prospect of as part of that backing down. I think that is got to be the likely objective of European pressure to get him to back down, kick the issue forward into for talks to happen this year, next year, the year after.
Let's for a moment, however, assume he doesn't back down. The truth is, there is no way the Danish government could agree to sell Greenland because the government would immediately fall if it did. It's an extremely unpopular step as far as the Danes are concerned. On the other hand, if Trump acquires Greenland by force, he'll shatter NATO, as well as the Atlantic alliance that has bound Europe with America for pretty close to 80 years. Do you think he's really prepared to go so far? And if he did, where would that leave Europe?
I think the European expectation is that neither Trump nor the people around him, particularly in the Pentagon, actually is willing to destroy NATO. Trump's starting point is that he can have his cake and eat it. He can get Greenland from Denmark and still preserve NATO, which means an enormous number of American bases on the European continent, and American military facilities all over the continent that enable it to project its power around the world. I think that perhaps the most important objective from the European side is to rouse up fear and opposition inside the Republican Party, inside Congress, and actually inside the Pentagon against any perceived willingness of America, of Trump, to actually kill off NATO. So I think that we have to raise the fears that consequence of this could well be the end of NATO in order to sober the system up, them to realize that actually this is against the long-term interests of the United States. Now, people in NATO tell me that they are convinced that Trump actually believes that NATO is still of value to the United States. He may think that the Europeans have spent too little money or lifted too few weights, if you like, in this, but nonetheless, he understands, they think, the value of NATO. That's what we're going to see played out. Doesn't seem to understand it. The important tactic of the Europeans will be to make sure that others in America who do understand it get emboldened and indeed shocked enough to speak out and to push back against any effort to simply throw NATO.
Can you hear me, Mr. Emmott?
I can hear you. Did we have a technological problem there?
We had a brief technological problem, but you're with me, and that's the main thing. Do you think he cares? The papers like the Financial Times and the London Times are now speculating that if NATO is damaged, leave aside that it actually breaks and falls apart, but even if it's damaged and its unity is questioned, countries like Germany, Poland, and Canada could consider going nuclear. And if that happens, wouldn't the world become a lot more fragile and volatile and even dangerous?
Well, I think that the danger of other countries going nuclear has to be very seriously. Personally, I would put South Korea pretty high up in that list. I don't personally think Japan or Germany is like domestic political reasons, but nonetheless, I think that the danger of nuclear proliferation simply becoming almost seeming like an obligation by governments as they realize that the notion of extended deterrence from America really doesn't make sense anymore, really does need to be taken seriously. But we have to remember that Donald Trump is just about to turn 80 years old. Yet he has 3 more years in office, unless, of course, he overthrows the American Constitution and continues. But even then, Anno tells us that actually he can't stay much longer. And what we and the South and the Japanese and others have to think about is the long term, the future relationships between our countries and future administration states. It's not in the European interest to throw NATO, for NATO to be destroyed. We absolutely, even if NATO, if you like, reduces in importance and indeed in collaboration during this period, we would want to preserve something that we could resuscitate, reconstruct when a more favorable political climate emerges in the United States. We can't make any assumptions about when that will be, whether it will be as soon as 2028 or whether it takes longer. But nonetheless, alongside the destruction that's going on, thanks to the Trump administration, we, which includes India, but critically it includes the security allies of the United States, have to think about how to reconstruct in all our interests after this storm has passed.
The paradox is that Trump claims he's acting to defend Greenland against Russia and China, but any damage that he does to NATO, any question marks that he raises about the future of American bases in Europe are in fact going to be a delight as far as the Russians are concerned. He's playing into their hands.
Absolutely, he's playing into their hands, and he's absolutely playing into the Chinese hands. And one of the difficulties I have with Donald Trump is why he doesn't understand this, or why he doesn't treat this as important. I have two answers to that. One is that he essentially thinks about his role as president in personal terms, to do with personal power, personal legacy, personal enrichment, frankly, for his this is the most corrupt American administration in history, I would think. So he thinks in those terms, and therefore doesn't care that much fundamentally about competition with Russia and China. Or the second explanation is that he thinks America is so powerful that in fact it can stand on its own, and maybe ultimately will need to stand on its own in contest with the powers, Russia, China, and in future India, and that America really needs to stand on its own feet and defend its own strength. And these allies are more burdens than assets. I think that he's wrong in that regard about allies being rather than an asset. But nonetheless, that's the best way to understand what he's doing. But there's no doubt that the leaderships in both Beijing and Moscow absolutely love what is going on.
Let me at this point, Mr. Emmott, broaden our discussion a little. Greenland, of course, is only one aspect of Trump's high-handed behavior. He's attacked Venezuela, he's carried out airstrikes over Syria and Nigeria, he's cast covetous eyes on Panama, spoken of annexing Canada, and threatened Colombia, Cuba, and Mexico. Is America becoming a rogue superpower under Donald Trump?
I think America has become a predatory superpower under Donald Trump. When he has power, he believes he should use it. And I think that he is using it. He has shown a great willingness to use it against generally what he sees as weaker opponents, which is why he doesn't confront Russia. He's not confronted China. There are good reasons he would be quite unwilling to confront, especially China, but picking on Panama, picking on Venezuela, picking on Canada, picking on Denmark, more acceptable to him, and he's very happy to flex his muscles. It is a rogue superpower in the sense that it's become a predatory superpower, one that picks off weaker opponents, but also absolutely acts with disdain for international law. That's not entirely, of course, out of the recent history of American administrations, where international law has been treated as being something that applies to other people rather than to the United States. The tradition of American exceptionalism goes back a very long way. So in that, I think we spent some time 20 years ago discussing whether George W. Bush was turning in America into a rogue state, a rogue superpower. So totally unknown, but I don't think it has been as predatory as Donald Trump is seeking to make it. America we can describe it as having, since the Second World War, having had a kind of empire around the world, but it's been an empire which has never required or involved conquest. It has involved sometimes coercion, often a kind of transaction between countries such as Japan, such as the Philippines, such as European countries and the United States, but has not been an imperial project of the sort that Russia is currently conducting. He's in Canada, for Greenland, for Panama, for Venezuela, whether or not America may be becoming an imperial power.
What do you make of the way Trump uses tariffs almost as a default option? There are tariffs for buying Russian oil. India faces them 25%. There are tariffs for trading with Iran. There are tariffs now for obstructing his claims to Greenland. And according to the Élysée, 200% tariffs on French wines and champagnes have been threatened because Macron seems to be unkeen to join the Board of Peace. What do you make of this use of tariffs?
Well, I think it is somewhat ridiculous. Some of it is just hot air. He makes many more threats about tariffs than are actually implemented. But also, he thinks that this is a power that resides on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office in the White House. We're about to learn from the Supreme Court as to whether the Supreme Court agrees that this really resides in the White House, or whether or not it oughtn't actually to be a power of Congress, and therefore require him not to just make airy threats of tariffs for any purpose that he wishes, but rather to actually get congressional authorization for the imposition of tariffs. And in a matter of days or weeks, we will hear whether his claim that he can declare a national emergency and use emergency powers to set tariffs at will actually in the face of the US Constitution. And that could change quite a lot in terms of this type of behavior from Trump.
If the Supreme Court verdict goes against Trump, it would embarrass him, perhaps even humiliate him, wouldn't it?
I think it will. I think it will. If it goes against him, it will embarrass him, humiliate him, and therefore anger him. He has made all sorts of claims that the Supreme Court, if the Supreme Court were to go against him, this would be a disaster for America's economy, disaster for national security, a disaster for the future of America, which he takes this very seriously. Now, plenty of analysts go, well, how could he rebuild his panoply of tariffs if the court goes against him? And there are many ways in which he could rebuild the array of tariffs that he's put in place, but not easily, actually, and probably not as comprehensively as he has made them down, and not with such lack of accountability.
Finally, before I end, let me ask you a question about what Trump calls the Donroe Doctrine. He's identified the Western Hemisphere as an area where American interests will predominate. Do you think he's prepared to concede similar spheres of influence to Russia and China where they can have their way? And if the answer is yes, what sort of world will we end up with?
My suspicion, and none of us have evidence about this, but my suspicion is that he's not actually willing to concede that. I think that he, and particularly a lot of the people around him, continue to believe that America needs to be a global power, and that America would suffer greatly if, for example, China dominate the whole of the Western Pacific, and to treat that as its unchallenged sphere of influence, analogous to the doctrine. So really, assuming that I'm right, that he actually doesn't, at least in theory, wish to accept this, then the question is, what price is he prepared to pay to stop it happening? Because there's no doubt that each step he makes to implement his sphere of influence acts as an encouragement to China and to Russia to make further steps to establish theirs, and to see who, and in particular the United States, who in the United States is willing to try to stop them. I would very much expect China to test that proposition as this year plays out, most likely in bullying tactics in the Philippines. But India is very familiar with the bully boy tactics of China as well. It's possible that India could also be a target, but more likely it would be the Philippines because of the Philippines defense treaty with the United States. By pushing back the Philippines, Xi Jinping would find out whether Donald Trump is willing to pay any price to prevent China from establishing its own sphere, and then ultimately whether it's prepared to pay any price to prevent the takeover of Taiwan by force. So it's a dangerous game. I think he starts this game not thinking that he's willing to accept spheres of influence in the world, but it's possible that that could be his inadvertent outcome.
Finally, has he dealt a body blow to multilateralism as we knew it? I ask that question because in addition to everything that he's done in Venezuela, Greenland, Iran, he's also pulled America out of 66 global organizations and treaties, nearly half of which were in fact affiliated with the United Nations. So has he dealt multilateralism a body blow, and where does that leave the United Nations?
I think that he's dealt American-led multilateralism a body blow because the credibility of American presence in all of these organizations is in tatters, in shreds. Yes, a future administration might rejoin, many just as Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement on climate change, but then the next administration after that might withdraw again. So the idea that multilateralism is in any sense engineered or fueled by an American initiative is being destroyed by Trump. But multilateralism in general, he's probably encouraging, because how do we as smaller and medium-sized countries face up to this? The answer is we're weaker alone, stronger together. So forming multilateral alliances and collaborations between us, whether it's with the CPTPP, the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership of Free Trade in East Asia, or with Mercosur, as the European Union is seeking to do of a trade currently, or a myriad other setups, we will have no choice but to seek to build, deepen, and hopefully preserve for the future multilateral fora, ourselves stronger in the face of this superpower bullying.
So multilateralism has to be protected and preserved in the face of Trump's defiance against it.
I think it does have to be protected and preserved in the face of his defiance. The United Nations definitely is in a very weak part of its history, very, very much downtrodden, which is not new. It essentially is a result of having a Security Council in which Russia, China, and the United States all have vetoes, and when one or more of those is unwilling to cooperate, is essentially impotent. So the UN is definitely greatly weakened, but that we, whether it's Japan, whether it's the United Kingdom, whether it's the European Union, we need to find every way we can to find other multilateral fora in order to compensate for this behavior. Multilateralism is dead. Long live multilateralism.
Bill Emmott, thank you very much for the time you've given me. Thank you very much for sharing your understanding and analysis with us. I apologize to the audience for the fact that we did have frequently problems with the line, but I think despite that, everything that Mr. Emmott was saying was easy to follow and understand. Thank you very much indeed. Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you so much, Karan.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, And if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.